At the edge of a quiet lakeside community in rural Minnesota, an ordinary evening was about to turn into an unforgettable tale of heroism, heartbreak, and profound human connection. Tonight, under the glow of a fading sunset, a lone figure struggled in the dark waters of Lake Harriet, his frantic splashes a desperate cry for help. On the shore, a Labrador retriever named Scout stood poised, ears raised and body tense, as if gripped by an inexplicable awareness that destiny was calling. What happened next was both miraculous and deeply moving, a single moment of canine bravery that would spark a chain of events, leaving everyone in tears and forever changed by the power of love, resilience, and hope. Lake Harriet was usually serene at this time of evening. Nestled in the heart of Minneapolis and lovingly maintained by the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board, the lake was known for its picturesque walking paths, gentle waves, and the comforting hum of cicadas beneath a fiery sunset. People often strolled along the shore, a cup of coffee in hand, pausing to watch the sailboats dancing on the rippling water. Couples walked in step, children clutched melting ice cream cones, and joggers measured their laps against the fading daylight. On this particular day, the sun had dipped just low enough to color the horizon, a watercolor blend of orange and pink. It cast a warm glow across the gently rolling water and the stately old trees that framed the lake. Their leaves, already turning gold with the approach of autumn, caught the last of the light, shimmering as if laced with magic. The atmosphere exuded a sense of cozy calm, an evening that invited families to linger outside just a bit longer, to bask in the final stretch of summer's warmth. Just then, a single figure, barely perceptible against the darkening shoreline, waded a few steps into the lake. Unbeknownst to everyone around, save for one watchful pair of eyes belonging to a faithful dog, this lone figure's steps were unsteady. Perhaps it was fatigue, perhaps something heavier weighing on his heart. Either way, each step seemed imbued with an aching sadness. A dog named Scout, a black Labrador retriever with a shiny coat and an uncanny sense of empathy, perked up at the sight. Scout was out for his evening walk with his owner, Linda Henderson, when he noticed something amiss. Linda was momentarily distracted by a phone call, her attention drifting to the bright screen in her palm. Scout, however, was wholly immersed in the smells, sights, and subtle cues of nature around him. A gentle breeze fluttered the tips of his ears. The dog's nose quivered, as if catching a strange current in the air, something beyond mere curiosity. Scout's gaze followed the man as he trudged deeper into the lake, water rising to his waist. Without warning, the man seemed to vanish beneath the surface. There was no dramatic shout, no wild flailing of arms. There was only a muted slip, a splash swallowed by the soft hush of rippling water. Scout tensed, tail halting its usual wagging. Instinct gripped him with an urgency that belied the otherwise tranquil setting. Linda sensed Scout's sudden shift. She lifted her eyes and saw the water swirling. Confusion flickered across her face, replaced almost immediately by alarm. The shape in the water was no longer visible. All that remained was a single ripple emanating outward, like the echo of a silent cry. Time seemed to slow. Linda's phone fell from her hand, landing with a soft thud on the grass. Scout was already in motion, powerful legs launching him toward the lake's edge. People around them looked up, some alarmed, some bewildered, as the dog plunged into the water without hesitation. In that fleeting moment, between the instant Scout dove in and the moment Linda realized what was happening, something extraordinary set this night on a collision course with destiny. Scout paddled with astonishing speed, his strong limbs propelling him through the water in wide, confident strokes. Labrador retrievers were bred for water retrieves, yet Linda had never actually seen her companion in a life or death situation. Panic constricted her chest as she raced to the shoreline, eyes darting across the surface for any sign of the man. Some bystanders began to gather, drawn by Linda's frantic calls for help. A young couple set down their picnic basket and waded into the shallows, but it was Scout who reached the submerged figure first. The man's face bobbed in and out of the water, pale and terror-stricken. His lips quivered as lake water choked him. Scout circled, nuzzling the man's shoulder with his muzzle, making desperate attempts to keep his head above the surface. Anyone watching could see the tense determination in Scout's eyes, the primal urgency that coursed through a dog's veins when a life needed saving. With a series of swift motions, Scout clamped his teeth gently onto the man's shirt collar, shifting his weight to keep the man from going under. The struggle was immediate, and brutal arms flailing, the water roiling in all directions. Despite the man's unconscious or semi-conscious attempts to grab at the dog, Scout stayed focused, his powerful tail acting like a rudder. With a steady rhythm, he used every ounce of strength in his body to guide the man back toward the shore. Linda, tears streaming down her face, waded forward to help. Two other onlookers jumped in, working together to pull the man onto dry land. The man lay motionless, water dripping from his soaked clothes. Linda knelt beside him, pressing trembling fingers to his neck in a desperate search for a pulse. Time froze, compressed into sharp, anxious seconds. Then Linda felt it, a faint, unsteady heartbeat. Relief flooded her. She signaled to the crowd, "He's alive!" A collective sigh rippled across the ring of concerned faces. Someone called 911 while another bystander, who identified herself as a nurse, stepped forward to administer first aid. Scout remained at the man's side, panting heavily. Water droplets clung to his fur, glistening in the fading light. His gentle brown eyes, still wide with concern, flickered between Linda and the unconscious stranger. It was as if Scout was pleading for the man's life to be spared. While the nurse worked to stabilize him, Linda stroked Scout's muzzle, whispering words of gratitude for her faithful friend. She couldn't help but feel that a miraculous bond had just been forged between dog and man, a bond that would soon reveal a deeper purpose than anyone could have anticipated. In a flurry of flashing lights and urgent footsteps, paramedics arrived and carefully lifted the man onto a stretcher. The small crowd parted to let them through. Linda instinctively followed, Scout at her heels, unsure if they should accompany him to the hospital or remain behind. The paramedic gently suggested Linda stay to provide a statement to the authorities about what had happened. "I don't even know his name," Linda said, voice quivering. She watched the ambulance speed away, red lights disappearing around the bend of the parkway. In that moment, Linda felt an inexplicable tug at her heart. She'd never met the stranger, knew nothing about him, yet she felt invested in his well-being. Scout's unwavering focus on the retreating ambulance mirrored her sentiments. He whimpered softly, as if urging Linda not to let this end here. Soon, the police arrived, gathering statements from witnesses. It was only after rummaging through the man's discarded jacket, found near a bench on the shore, that an officer located a driver's license bearing the name Daniel Brooks. Daniel was a local, his address only a few miles from the lake. "We'll find out more when we get to the hospital," the officer promised. Linda gave her account, the phone call, the watery slip, Scout's incredible rescue. She noticed tears welling in the eyes of a bystander who admitted she'd felt powerless watching the man slip beneath the surface. Another witness, a jogger who had paused mid-run, spoke in hushed admiration of the dog's extraordinary instincts. Once the statements were done and the officers left, the crowd slowly dispersed. The sun had fully set by now, leaving the lake awash in moonlight and flickering lampposts. Linda knelt beside Scout, her hands shaking as she stroked his damp fur. She felt a flood of emotions, gratitude that her beloved companion had saved a life, guilt for having been momentarily distracted, and a profound curiosity about the man named Daniel Brooks. Who was he, and what had led him into Lake Harriet's waters on such a still, calm evening? That night, Linda couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned, her thoughts returning endlessly to the image of the drowning man. She thought back to the day she first adopted Scout from a local rescue center sponsored by Purina. The dog had been scrawny, trembling in the corner of a cage, caked in dirt and with eyes that glowed with quiet intelligence. Something about his timid yet soulful gaze had compelled her to pick him. In the weeks that followed, Scout adapted quickly to Linda's routine morning walks, lazy afternoons in the backyard, evening strolls by the lake. He learned commands with ease and displayed an uncanny ability to sense Linda's moods, comforting her on days she felt low. Linda herself was no stranger to emotional turmoil. She had moved to Minneapolis a couple of years ago, fleeing a painful divorce that left her financially strained and emotionally scarred. She found solace in the city's lakes and parks, walking aimlessly for hours just to lose herself in the natural beauty. Adopting Scout became a turning point in her life. His unconditional love and unwavering loyalty slowly healed the emotional wounds her marriage had left behind. Yet, Linda had always wondered if there was a greater reason they found each other, some cosmic design that led Scout into her life. Seeing him dive into Lake Harriet to save Daniel Brooks felt like an affirmation. It wasn't just luck or coincidence. Maybe Scout was destined to be a lifeline, not just for Linda, but for others as well. At around 2 in the morning, Linda decided she couldn't wait any longer. She needed to know if Daniel survived. Slipping on a pair of sneakers, she grabbed her car keys and urged Scout into the back seat. The roads were mostly empty, streetlights reflecting off the wet pavement like ghostly trails. Linda steered her old sedan toward the nearest hospital, hoping beyond hope that this was where Daniel had been taken. As Linda pulled into the hospital parking lot, she realized she had no idea what she would say or do once inside. Would she even be allowed to see Daniel? After all, she was a complete stranger. Yet the drive here wasn't about social protocol. It was a pull she could neither explain nor ignore. She walked up to the reception desk, Scout waiting patiently outside because of hospital rules. Linda explained in anxious whispers that she was looking for a man named Daniel Brooks, who had been brought in earlier that night. After some checking, the nurse at the desk confirmed Daniel was indeed admitted to the ICU in critical condition, but stable for now. "Are you family?" the nurse asked gently. Linda hesitated, then murmured, "No, but my dog saved him from drowning. I just need to know he's okay." The nurse's face softened. She glanced around the quiet corridor. Night shifts in the hospital always carried an air of lonely resilience. Under normal circumstances, no visitors would be allowed in the ICU at such an hour unless they were immediate family. But something about Linda's earnestness, or perhaps the nurse's own compassion, led her to bend the rules. She gestured for Linda to follow. Clutching her purse to her side, Linda walked down the hushed hallway, fluorescent lights reflecting off the smooth tiles. The nurse paused at an observation window, pointing to a room where a lone figure lay connected to monitors and the fourth drips. Even from this distance, Linda could see Daniel's face, pale against the stark white sheets. "He's breathing on his own now, which is a good sign," the nurse whispered. "We'll have to wait and see if there's any damage, but for now, he's stable. The doctors are optimistic." Linda nodded, a wave of relief washing over her. She felt tears form at the corner of her eyes. She thanked the nurse profusely, turned, and walked back toward the exit, her emotions swirling relief, concern, and an inexplicable sense of responsibility. Outside the sliding doors, Scout waited, tail wagging softly as he sensed Linda's return. She ruffled his ears, whispering, "He's going to be okay, Scout. You saved him." They drove home in a thoughtful hush, the dark streets illuminated only by the faint glow of streetlights. It occurred to Linda that the real journey was just beginning. Over the next few days, Linda found herself strangely drawn back to the hospital. She would sit in the waiting area, hoping to catch a doctor, nurse, or anyone who could tell her how Daniel Brooks was progressing. The staff came to recognize her, acknowledging with solemn nods. Scout had to wait outside, of course, but Linda made sure to bring a fresh bottle of water and a treat for her canine hero during these unplanned vigils. On the third day, Linda noticed a commotion near the ICU entrance. A young woman was in tears, speaking frantically to a nurse. Linda approached cautiously and caught snippets of the conversation. "Only living relative," the woman sobbed. "I had no idea he was so depressed." Linda's heart twisted. She guessed this must be Daniel's sister, or perhaps a cousin. She waited until the woman finished speaking with the nurse before carefully introducing herself. "I'm Linda. My dog saved Daniel's life," she began, her voice tentative. "I just wanted to know how he's doing." The woman's tear-streaked face lit with a sad gratitude. "Thank you," she breathed, as if those two words contained all the relief and sorrow in the world. "I'm his sister, Catherine. I didn't realize he was in such a dark place. She paused, voice quavering. "We haven't been close for a while." Linda and Catherine slipped into an empty waiting room to talk. Over paper cups of lukewarm coffee, Linda learned about Daniel's life, his recent job loss, the strain of mounting debts, and the emotional isolation he felt after their parents passed away. He'd apparently been struggling with depression for months. Catherine's voice trembled with shame and regret. "I was caught up in my own life, marriage, kids, job. I didn't check in on him enough." "I had no clue," she sniffled, tears clinging to her lashes. "When they called and told me he was found drowning at Lake Harriet, I feared the worst." Linda gently laid a hand over Catherine's. "I don't know what Daniel was going through, but I'm glad Scout was there. He's a special dog." I think he sensed something was wrong before anyone else did. For the first time that day, Catherine gave a small, fragile smile. "I'd love to meet him. And I know Daniel would too. The doctor said he might wake up later today or tomorrow." She swallowed hard, as if the weight of the unknown pressed on her heart. "Will you come back then?" Linda nodded. There was no other answer possible, though she couldn't explain why she felt so responsible for a man she'd never known. All she knew was that she felt an unmistakable pull, a sense of purpose that Scout seemed to share. Some part of her believed that Daniel wasn't meant to face the aftermath of this near tragedy alone. The next day, Linda arrived at the hospital to find Catherine pacing outside Daniel's room. Through the glass, Linda could see him awake, though still dazed, oxygen cannula beneath his nose, machines beeping softly. Catherine motioned for Linda to enter. Anxiety thrummed in Linda's chest as she stepped inside. Daniel looked up, eyes clouded with a mixture of confusion and exhaustion. The bruises around his forehead and arms suggested he'd struggled in the water, yet beneath that was a haunted emptiness that took Linda by surprise. She cleared her throat, taking a seat in a plastic chair by the bed. "I'm Linda," she said softly. I was at the lake with my dog when you—" She paused, uncertain how to phrase it without bringing up too many painful memories. "Scout, my dog, he saw you. He jumped in and saved you." A flicker of recognition crossed Daniel's eyes, followed by something Linda couldn't name: shame, perhaps, or regret. He nodded slowly. His voice was raspy, barely more than a whisper. "Thank you, your dog saved my life," he repeated, as though trying to piece together half-remembered fragments of a dream. "Yes," Linda murmured, voice trembling. "He sensed you were in trouble. You went under the water, and Scout pulled you back." Catherine, standing beside the bed, reached for Daniel's hand. "You scared me," she said, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. "I was so afraid we'd lost you." Daniel closed his eyes, a lone tear tracking down his cheek. After a long pause, he spoke in a wavering tone. "I'm sorry. I couldn't see a way out." He swallowed, as if the confession pained him. "When I lost my job, everything started to spiral. I couldn't pay rent. My best friend moved away. It felt like I had no one left." I know that sounds dramatic, but it was so dark. Linda squeezed the betrayal gently, empathy flooding her. She recalled the despair she felt during her divorce, those days where she thought no one could possibly understand. "It's not dramatic," she said softly. "It's just pain, and pain feels big when you're living it." Silence filled the room for a moment, but it was a comforting silence, cradled by the hum of hospital equipment. Catherine wiped her cheeks. Linda caught Daniel's eyes again and saw gratitude and overwhelming sadness living side by side in his gaze. "I'd like to meet Scout," Daniel said finally. "If that's all right." Linda managed a small smile. "I'll bring him by when you're feeling better. He'd be happy to see you." They left soon after, giving Daniel time to rest. In the corridor, Linda exchanged a look with Catherine, a sense of shared responsibility passing between them. Beneath the fluorescent lights, everything felt both stark and hopeful at once. 2 more days passed before Daniel was deemed strong enough to receive visitors outside the sterile confines of the ICU. Linda worked it out with hospital staff to bring Scout through a side entrance and into a private courtyard designated for therapy animals and patient visits. Though Scout wasn't a certified therapy dog, the nurses made an exception given his heroics and the positive emotional impact it could have on Daniel's recovery. When Daniel stepped into the courtyard supported by a wheelchair and in the 4th stand, he looked visibly frail but alert. Scout, as if sensing a unique gravity in the moment, approached slowly. Daniel extended a trembling hand, letting Scout sniff his fingertips. After a moment of hesitation, Scout nuzzled his muzzle against Daniel's palm, tail wagging gently. Time seemed to pause. Linda watched from a short distance away, her heart fluttering. Catherine stood beside her, tears forming as she witnessed her brother's cautious smile. "Hey there, big guy," Daniel murmured, voice hoarse. His eyes glistened as he ran his hand through Scout's glossy black fur. Scout licked Daniel's wrist, an unspoken bond coursing between them, gratitude, compassion, a second chance at life. A therapist who happened to be nearby saw the tender interaction and approached with curiosity. Upon learning how Scout had saved Daniel, her eyes widened. It's amazing how animals can connect with us on such a deeper level than words. This bond might actually help in Daniel's emotional healing. Linda felt goosebumps rise on her arms. She knew exactly what the therapist meant. When she rescued Scout, she'd been rescuing herself too, in a way. And now, it seemed Scout was continuing this chain of salvation, passing it along to Daniel. For Daniel, the moment was transformative. "I remember the water going dark," he said quietly, looking at Scout. "I remember thinking, this is it. I'm too tired to fight anymore. Then I felt something like a firm tug on my shirt, and I felt air on my face again." He swallowed, emotion snagging his voice. "I never thought I'd owe my life to a dog, of all things. But here I am." The courtyard fell silent, leaves rustling in a faint breeze. Catherine gently placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder, tears streaking her cheeks. The significance of this moment was not lost on anyone present. Scout had done more than save Daniel's life. He'd become a beacon of hope for a man who had lost sight of the light. Once released from the hospital, Daniel faced a daunting reality. He still had no job, and rent on his modest apartment was months overdue. Adding to the financial burden were new hospital bills. Catherine offered him a place to stay, but her home was cramped already with 2 children. Daniel also wrestled with guilt. He feared imposing, especially after having pushed his sister away for so long. Linda, sensing Daniel's turmoil, found herself stepping in as a friend. She invited him over for dinner one evening, partly to make sure he was eating properly and partly to let Scout and Daniel spend more time together. Daniel arrived wearing wrinkled khakis and a shirt that hung loose on his frame. Though his body still bore the mark of recent trauma bruises around his arms, dark circles under weary eyes, his spirit seemed lighter in Scout's presence. The dog greeted him at the door, tail wagging in broad strokes against the hallway walls. Over plates of warm lasagna in Linda's cozy dining room, they talked. Daniel shared stories from his childhood visits to the Minnesota State Fair, fishing trips on Lake Minnetonka with his dad. There had been happier times. Hearing him speak so fondly about these memories offered a glimpse into the person Daniel might be if not for his struggle with depression. Linda reciprocated by opening up about her divorce and the sense of failure she carried around. I thought moving here would solve all my problems, but emotional baggage doesn't just disappear because you change scenery, she confessed, her gaze cast downward at her half-eaten dinner. Daniel nodded sympathetically. I know the feeling. I used to think if I could just land a better job or move to a new apartment, things would be different. But the darkness follows, you know. They spoke well into the night, the hum of Linda's refrigerator filling the pauses in conversation. Scout slept by Daniel's feet, occasionally shifting to press his warm flank against Daniel's legs. It was as though the dog was silently reminding Daniel, "You're not alone." By the time Daniel left, Linda felt a kinship with him, an understanding that surpasses simple friendship. They were two wounded souls, finding solace in the unconditional love of a dog who seemed to have a knack for saving people at their lowest. With Linda's encouragement, Daniel began counseling sessions at a local mental health clinic. The weeks that followed were filled with ups and downs. Some days, he struggled to get out of bed, assaulted by waves of regret and shame. Other days, he found fleeting moments of clarity, like the day he noticed the crisp autumn air and the fiery colors of leaves drifting from the trees onto the sidewalks. Small wonders, but wonders nonetheless. Linda and Catherine supported him, each in their own way. Catherine helped him navigate the confusing process of applying for unemployment benefits and setting up a plan to manage his medical bills. Linda offered companionship, inviting Daniel for evening walks with Scout, strolling the same path along Lake Harriet where his life was nearly lost. Passing by the spot filled Daniel with a mixture of terror and gratitude. Little by little, he started to see a future again faint and fragile, but present. He even began to entertain ideas of returning to school or finding a job in a different field. A part of him felt he had been given a blank slate, a chance to rebuild from the ashes of his despair. Scout, meanwhile, became a sort of therapy dog in an unofficial capacity. At Linda's home, where Daniel often dropped by, Scout would greet him with that exuberant tail wag, a canine grin that never failed to lift Daniel's mood. Sometimes, Linda caught Daniel kneeling beside Scout, simply running his fingers through the dog's fur, lost in thought. It seemed those quiet moments soothed the storm raging in Daniel's mind. On a crisp Saturday morning, Linda and Daniel sat on a bench by the lake, sipping hot chocolate. Scout circled around, sniffing fallen leaves and occasionally trotting back to nudge, Linda's hand reminding her to offer treats. Across the water, sunlight danced in glimmering shards on the rippling surface. "It's so strange," Daniel mused. "One moment, I was determined to end my life. The next, I was gasping for air, saved by a dog. It almost feels like there's a bigger plan, like Scout was there for a reason." Linda nodded, her gaze trained on the horizon where the lake met the sky. "Maybe we all have a purpose. I like to believe Scout has always sensed that. He pulled me out of my depression when I first adopted him. And now he's pulled you back from the brink." Daniel exhaled, breath fogging in the chilly air. "I guess the real question is, what do I do with this second chance?" Linda reached over to gently pat his shoulder. You live, she said quietly. You find what gives you joy, what brings light into your life, and you fight for it. A single tear glistened at the edge of Daniel's eye, but he quickly wiped it away, nodding. For a while, they sat in companionable silence, both grateful for the stillness of the moment, both aware of how fleeting and precious life truly was. Shortly after, Daniel received a phone call from an old friend who worked at an animal shelter across town. The friend heard about Daniel's near-death experience and how Scout had saved him. Moved by the story, the friend offered Daniel a temporary position at the shelter, helping with administrative tasks, caring for the animals, and assisting with adoptions. Though the pay wasn't high, Daniel jumped at the opportunity. It was work he felt connected to on a deep level now. He saw in every vulnerable cat or dog a piece of himself lost, scared, uncertain, yet still yearning for love and survival. When Linda heard the news, she beamed with pride. "That's perfect for you," she declared, eyes shining. "It's a place where you can give something back after everything you've been through." Daniel's first day at the shelter was overwhelming but exhilarating. He helped clean kennels, fed rescue animals, and guided potential adopters through the process of choosing a new family member. It struck him how many of these dogs and cats had been abandoned, often for reasons beyond their control. He felt a pang in his chest every time he locked eyes with a terrified pup shivering in a corner. But he also felt a surge of hope when a family decided to adopt. Each success story reminded him that redemption and new beginnings are possible for anyone. Within weeks, Daniel's demeanor visibly changed. He stood straighter, spoke with more confidence, and even allowed himself to smile, truly smile, in the presence of the animals he cared for. The darkness that had once consumed him was still there, but it no longer dictated his every breath. It had been relegated to a corner of his mind, a lingering shadow dwarfed by a growing sense of purpose. During this period, he also grew closer to Scout, often inviting Linda and the dog to visit the shelter. Scout would greet the other animals with calm curiosity, and they, sensing a non-threatening presence, would often wag their tails or meow in welcome. Linda watched the transformation in Daniel with gratitude, marveling at how quickly life could turn around under the right circumstances. Just when it seemed Daniel's life was on an upswing, a letter arrived in his mailbox, an eviction notice for his old apartment. Despite having moved out to stay temporarily with Catherine, the landlord was demanding back rent and threatening legal action. The financial strain was more than Daniel could handle, even with his new job at the shelter. Stress began to coil in his chest, each day overshadowed by the dread of mounting debts. Linda noticed the change in his demeanor. He grew quiet again, his laughter less frequent. During one of their walks around Lake Harriet, Daniel confessed he feared backsliding into the dark place he'd once inhabited. "I can't seem to get ahead, no matter how hard I try," he muttered, hands jammed in his pockets. I'm trying to take care of myself, but it feels like every time I stand up, something knocks me back down." Linda felt a pang of empathy. She had been there trying to rebuild her life while debts loomed and the future looked uncertain. She reached out and squeezed Daniel's hand. "You're not alone this time," she whispered. "Whatever happens, we'll figure it out together." At that moment, Scout bolted off the path, barking furiously at something near the water's edge. Alarmed, Linda and Daniel rushed to see what had triggered the dog's sudden reaction. A child's sneaker floated near the shore, bobbing helplessly in the current. On the grass, a second sneaker lay abandoned. Panic seized Linda's chest. What if a child was in danger? But just as quickly as the scare began, it ended. A harried mother appeared, rushing from the direction of the nearest playground. Her daughter stood nearby, sheepishly explaining how her shoe fell off while she was dipping her toe in the water. In relief, Linda patted Scout's head, praising him for being alert yet again. Walking back, Daniel looked at the sneaker, then at Scout. "He really can't help but save people," Daniel murmured, trying to inject some levity into the tense moment. The child's predicament turned out harmless, but it was a reminder of the precariousness of life and how quickly situations could change. Word of Scout's heroic act had quietly circulated around the neighborhood, helped along by the small crowd that had witnessed the rescue. One evening, Linda and Daniel returned from the shelter to find a surprise in front of Linda's door, a basket overflowing with dog treats, toys, and handwritten notes addressed to Scout the hero. Touched by the gesture, Linda posted a thank you message on a local community board. She also recounted more details of how Scout saved Daniel, how Daniel was now working at an animal shelter, and how life was slowly getting back on track. She mentioned, with hesitant vulnerability, the financial hurdles Daniel still faced. The response was overwhelming. Neighbors, friends, and even strangers posted messages of support. A few people even donated to a small crowdfunding campaign that Catherine set up to help Daniel settle his debts. Donations trickled in at first, then picked up momentum as more people shared the link. In a matter of weeks, enough was raised to cover Daniel's back rent and a portion of his medical bills. When Linda showed Daniel the campaign and the outpouring of messages, he was speechless. He scanned through notes of encouragement. "Keep going, you're worth it, don't give up, Scout believes in you, and so do we." Tears welled in his eyes, and he turned to Linda, voice shaking. "I never thought anyone cared. I can't believe people are this generous." Linda's own eyes misted. "They care because you matter," she said softly, "because we all do." That same evening, Daniel posted a heartfelt thank you video to the community, with Scout by his side, wagging his tail. The response was immediate and heartwarming, with many people commenting how they'd been touched by Scout's bravery and Daniel's journey from despair to hope. For Daniel, it was a transformative moment. He felt seen, valued, and supported, a complete reversal of the isolation he once experienced. As the months passed, an unspoken connection grew between Linda and Daniel. Their shared experiences of trauma, healing, and the unwavering loyalty of Scout created a bond that neither had anticipated. They found themselves finishing each other's sentences, sharing inside jokes, and offering emotional support in ways that felt effortless. Catherine teased Daniel about this budding affection. "Don't mess this up," she'd say playfully. "Linda seems like a keeper, and Scout, he's the best wingman you could ask for." Yet both Linda and Daniel moved with caution, mindful that their vulnerabilities were still raw. They chose to focus on building a foundation of trust, rather than rushing into romance. Evening walks around Lake Harriet became a ritual. They'd stroll under a canopy of stars, Scout leading the way. They talked about everything, from their favorite childhood memories to their deepest regrets, from the mundane details of daily life to the philosophical questions of purpose and destiny. On a chilly winter evening, after an unseasonal snowfall turned the city into a glittering landscape of white, Daniel and Linda found themselves huddled by Linda's fireplace. Scout dozed contentedly near the warm flames. Outside, the wind howled, piling snowdrifts against the windows. The atmosphere inside was hushed, almost sacred. Linda made 2 steaming cups of chamomile tea. Sitting down on the couch next to Daniel, she handed him a mug. They sipped in comfortable silence. The soft glow of the fire illuminated their faces, dancing shadows across the walls. Suddenly, as if guided by an unseen force, Daniel placed his hand gently over Linda's. The warmth of that touch, set against the raging storm outside, felt like a promise of safety, acceptance, and possibly a future together. She looked at him, eyes brimming with gratitude. Neither needed to speak in that moment. Words would have been superfluous. Outside, nature's fury continued unabated, but within those four walls, an unspoken love was quietly blossoming, nurtured by empathy, understanding, and the gentle presence of a dog who had saved them both in different ways. However, new beginnings seldom come without the haunting echoes of the past. One afternoon, Daniel received a phone call from his former boss, who heard about the rescue story through mutual acquaintances. The boss expressed sympathy and even hinted at possible openings at the old firm if Daniel was interested. At first, the idea seemed tempting. A higher salary could expedite clearing his debts and provide a more secure future. Yet the thought of returning to that environment, with its relentless pressures and cold corporate culture, turned his stomach. That job had been the beginning of his downward spiral. He turned to Linda for counsel. Maybe I should just go back. It'd be easier financially, he reasoned. But his voice betrayed doubt. Linda shook her head gently. Easier isn't always better, she said, stroking Scout's fur as he lay with his head on Daniel's foot. You've found purpose in your work at the shelter. You're making a difference. Is the money worth the cost to your mental health? Daniel sighed, staring at the floor. In that moment, Scout stood up, padded over, and placed his muzzle on Daniel's knee, gazing up at him with soulful brown eyes. Daniel felt a pang of clarity. He recalled how lost and hopeless he'd felt in that old job, how its demands eroded his sense of self-worth. With a deep breath, he decided, no, it's not worth it. He declined the offer, a mixture of anxiety and relief coursing through him. But the conversation acted as a catalyst, forcing Daniel to confront how far he had come and how easily he could slip back into old patterns. He resolved that day to continue therapy, to maintain a support network, and to immerse himself in work that resonated with his heart. The idea took shape gradually, born out of Daniel's growing gratitude for the community's help. One evening, as he and Linda were closing up at the shelter, Daniel mentioned wanting to organize an adoption drive or a small fundraiser to benefit rescue animals. Linda jumped at the idea. What if we make it a community event? Invite local businesses, set up booths, have volunteer vets, do basic checkups. They pitched the concept to the shelter's director, who enthusiastically approved. Over the next month, Daniel and Linda poured their energies into planning the Hope for Paws Fest. They reached out to local cafes, pet stores, and even the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board to secure a scenic spot near Lake Harriet for the event. Flyers went up around the neighborhood, and word spread online, fueling excitement. On the day of the event, a crisp Saturday morning, the path near Lake Harriet was transformed into a lively carnival of compassion. Colorful tents and tables displayed adoptable animals, each one longing for a forever home. Volunteers milled about in bright T-shirts, handing out leaflets about responsible pet ownership. Families strolled hand in hand, children tugging parents excitedly to see the puppies. Even the local news turned up to cover the story, intrigued by the rescue dog and the man he saved. Scout, sporting a small bandana labeled Hero, basked in the attention. Children giggled as they petted him, while adults marveled at his calm, friendly demeanor. Daniel spent much of the day explaining Scout's heroic act, carefully downplaying his own role to highlight the dog's bravery. Linda managed a booth collecting donations for the shelter, her face glowing with pride every time someone asked about Scout. Catherine pitched in too, organizing a silent auction of handmade crafts and baked goods. The entire atmosphere buzzed with positivity, a far cry from the bleakness that once consumed Daniel's life. By the end of the day, they had raised a substantial amount of money, enough to expand the shelter's capacity and improve conditions for the animals. Several dogs and cats found new homes. Daniel looked around at the bustling crowd, at Linda's radiant smile, at Scout's wagging tail, and felt a surge of joy he could barely contain. He pulled Linda into a warm hug, tears brimming in his eyes. "We did it," he whispered, voice trembling with gratitude. She nodded, eyes glistening. "You did it," she corrected softly, though she knew it was a team effort. Deep down, she understood that Daniel had chosen to turn his pain into something beautiful, and in doing so, he saved not only himself, but countless animals and future families who would adopt them. As winter melted into a gentle spring, Daniel's life took on a new rhythm. Mornings at the shelter, afternoons spent planning future community events, evenings shared with Linda and Scout. He still had bad days, moments when the weight of depression pressed heavily on his chest, but he'd learned how to cope, how to reach out instead of retreating into solitude. He kept his therapy appointments, leaned on Catherine for family support, and drew strength from Linda's unwavering presence. One day, as they strolled around Lake Harriet, now budding with fresh leaves and a chorus of spring birds, Daniel paused at the very spot where Scout had saved him months before. The water lapped gently against the shore, a stark contrast to the turbulent emotions that had once consumed him. He picked up a smooth pebble and turned it over in his hand, then held Linda's gaze. "I almost threw my life away here," he said, voice shaky. "I think it's time to replace that memory with something else." Linda's heart pounded as he dropped to one knee, pebble in hand, looking up at her with an earnest, trembling smile. Scout, as if sensing the gravity of the moment, sat quietly nearby, alert but calm. "Linda," Daniel began, eyes shining with unshed tears, "you and Scout saved me in every sense of the word. You gave me hope when I had none. I know we've been through tough times, and I'm still finding my way, but there's one thing I'm certain of. I don't want to walk this path without you by my side." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a simple ring, silver and unpretentious, much like the man who offered it. "Will you marry me?" Tears slipped down Linda's cheeks, and she answered with a breathless, tearful yes as she fell into his arms. Applause erupted from a few onlookers who had gathered to witness the scene, no doubt drawn by the tender tableau. Scout barked once, tail wagging wildly, as if giving his own seal of approval. In that moment, the lake, the sky, the wind, it all seemed to join in a silent celebration, carrying the promise of a future built on resilience, empathy, and love. News of their engagement spread quickly among friends, family, and the local community that had rallied around Daniel's second chance. Catherine, elated, began planning a small celebration. Linda's parents, living out of state, promised to visit soon. The shelter staff teased Daniel about how Scout should be the ring bearer at the wedding. Through it all, Daniel remained profoundly aware of how close he had come to never seeing any of this. Every step forward felt like a gift, and he resolved never to take it for granted. He also decided to share his story publicly, in the hope of reaching others who might feel that same sense of isolation he once did. With Linda's help, he penned a deeply personal article titled "How a Dog Named Scout Gave Me a Second Chance," which the local newspaper agreed to publish. The response was overwhelming. Emails poured in from people who'd battled depression, from those who'd found solace in their pets, from families thanking him for reminding them to check in on loved ones who might be struggling. Some emails were difficult to read, heartbreaking stories of those who'd lost loved ones to suicide or had come close themselves. But Daniel answered every message, sometimes spending hours late into the night, offering words of comfort, hope, and shared experience. Linda supported him, ensuring he didn't overextend himself emotionally. They learned together that while empathy is a powerful healer, it can also weigh heavy on one's heart. Through it all, Scout remained the grounding force, a living reminder of the moment that changed everything. On the day the article appeared in print, Daniel found a renewed sense of purpose glowing in his chest. He realized that the darkest parts of his past could serve as a beacon for someone else. That knowledge felt like absolution, a way to transform pain into hope. As the seasons cycled once more, the day of Linda and Daniel's wedding arrived, a bright summer afternoon with a gentle breeze caressing the surface of Lake Harriet. The ceremony was small and intimate, held at a clearing near the water's edge. Rows of white folding chairs faced a simple arch adorned with wildflowers. Catherine stood at Daniel's side, wiping tears even before the vows began. Linda's father beamed with pride as he walked her down the makeshift aisle, while her mother discreetly dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. Scout, donning a small bow tie, padded confidently at the center of the procession, carrying a velvet pouch with the rings. Laughter bubbled through the gathering at the sight of the dog who had brought them all here in the first place. The officiant spoke briefly about love, resilience, and the serendipity that had led these two to one another. Daniel and Linda exchanged vows, their voices trembling with emotion. "I stand here today," Daniel said, eyes locking onto Linda's, "because you and Scout believed my life was worth saving. I promise to spend every day showing you the depth of my gratitude and the strength of our love." "And I promise you," Linda replied, voice catching, "to stand by you in both storms and sunshine, and to remind you how precious you are on the days you might forget." With the gentle rustle of leaves as the only background music, they sealed their vows with a kiss. Applause burst forth, mingling with the breeze that drifted across the lake's shimmering surface. Scout barked happily, bounding around the newlyweds as if he understood the magnitude of what had just taken place. A simple reception followed, featuring homemade food, a small wedding cake, and a medley of heartfelt toasts. Neighbors and friends reminisced about that fateful evening when a drowning man was saved by a brave dog, and how that single act of heroism rippled outward to touch so many lives. The day ended with sparklers and hugs under a dome of stars, a celebration not just of marriage, but of life's incredible ability to renew itself against all odds. In the months and years after the wedding, Daniel and Linda's life continued to blossom. They moved into a modest house near the lake, its cozy interior alive with laughter, dog toys, and the aroma of home-cooked meals. Scout, now a bit older but still spry, reigned as the benevolent guardian of the household, content to laze in sunbeams or accompany them on daily walks. Daniel discovered an unexpected calling in motivational speaking. Invitations to share his story at schools, community centers, and corporate events poured in. With each talk, he emphasized the importance of mental health awareness, the unconditional love animals provide, and the power of community support. He even brought Scout along whenever possible, allowing the dog to greet people and melt hearts in his gentle, unassuming way. Linda continued her work as a freelance graphic designer, weaving her creative flair into projects that promoted social causes. Together, they volunteered at the animal shelter on weekends, organizing adoption events, raising funds, and mentoring new volunteers. Their circle of friends grew to include people from all walks of life, each one touched in some manner by their story. And so, what began as a chilling brush with death in the waters of Lake Harriet became an unbreakable bond between a man, a dog, and the woman who helped guide him back to life. In time, many who heard the story would reflect on how a moment of despair had been transformed into a testament of hope, resilience, and the profound connections that can form in the most unlikely circumstances. Whenever someone asked Daniel if he believed in miracles, he would glance at Scout, smile, and reply, "Absolutely. Sometimes they come in the shape of a dog diving into a lake." In that single sentence lay an entire world of meaning, a world that embraced the reality of suffering, yet insisted that even in the darkest waters, there is a light worth swimming toward. Thank you for joining us on this deeply moving journey, a testament to love, resilience, and the power of a determined dog named Scout. Together, we've witnessed how even in the darkest moments, hope can surface in ways we least expect. We've seen how a life once given up can be reborn through compassion and community support. Daniel and Linda's story reminds us that every one of us has the potential to save or be saved when we reach out with open hearts. If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Help us spread the message that no matter how dire the situation, a helping hand or paw can make all the difference. By sharing this video, you're not only celebrating Scout's heroic act, you're also lighting a spark of hope for anyone out there who may feel alone in their struggle. Your support truly matters. Thank you.